Hey everyone, welcome back to day 2 of Dev Interrupted at DevOps Enterprise Summit. I'm your co-host Conor Bronsdon, and I'm joined by Guilherme Sesterheim, SAP DevOps SRE Engineer at Amazon Web Services. Gil, welcome to the podcast.
Very nice to meet you guys. Thank you for the introduction.
It's a great pleasure to have you with us. I know you're a speaker here at the summit. I know you had a really interesting talk on applying chaos engineering techniques to testing SAP installation. Can you dive into that? Chaos engineering is a fascinating topic.
I come from a very strong open source and DevOps culture. So I don't know, I'm pretty comfortable with regular languages like, Terraform, Jenkins, Ansible. So all of these open source technologies I'm very comfortable with. Around 3 or 4 years ago, I joined AWS. I work for the professional services, and I joined an SAP team. So I do have some SAP background as well from, the very beginning of my profession. But then I bring in all this load of knowledge and information around the open source part into the SAP world.
Which is atypical for SAP.
Very much. I don't know if everyone is familiar with, so it's a huge company. Yesterday I brought one very nice number just to show how big they are on the presentation. So basically, if you look for that on their website, they say that 77% of world's transaction revenue pass through at least one SAP system.
Wow.
77% of everything, all the money that flows through this world touches at least one SAP.
That's incredible.
That's amazing. I don't know any other company that has a metric huge like that, right? So SAP is this very mature and also a risk-averse company.
Yes.
So yes, they are slower than other companies into like modernizing their applications. So basically, what we approached yesterday was then how do we bring some modern technologies, some modern practices actually, like the chaos engineering into the SAP world. So basically, there are some stuff that we can do right now, nowadays, testing how resilient your servers on SAP are. Yesterday, we focused 100% on HANA, which is the database from SAP, and in-memory database. So basically, approaching some concept of how do we inject failures? How do we check of how things went? So did the database behave exactly like I was expecting before the failure injection? Or did something go wrong while I was doing that? So there are some techniques, some things that we can do using open source technology into the SAP world without going inside the SAP. So that's when things get more strict when we talk about SAP. But when we are still talking about the server, there's a lot we can do around the operations already.
Interesting. So it's more about using open source techniques and chaos engineering to extend SAP's capabilities.
Exactly. So when we talk about DevOps for SAP, the most common question that I have, questions that I get, I can separate them into two. So DevOps inside SAP, and that's very complex. We don't have a lot to do there. And frankly, it's hard. Of course, SAP has some offer because it's a buzzword, so it makes sense to talk about DevOps inside SAP. But honestly, there's not much, in my opinion, not much value that is generated by doing DevOps inside SAP because of the limitations.
You're just so limited on what you can do.
Yes. So it's hard for, automating tests. So a very small number of companies is already using Git for SAP. So everybody's using Git except SAP. Except the developers that go inside SAP, right?
Yeah.
And the second bucket, so DevOps inside SAP, it's very shy. It's hard. There's not much value added to the companies that want to use it. Of course, there are some things that we can do, but again, not much value added. And on the second bucket, we get then the DevOps around SAP. And basically, that's how I call it, around SAP, because you're not going inside, of course. Then you can get the servers. You can interact with the servers. So I work for AWS. My examples go into the EC2s and how we do things inside AWS. Yeah. So basically, when you install SAP in a server, you have there your EC2s standing. And the regular procedure for, any major application inside big organizations is that, okay, you installed something, it's working, you leave it there, you don't touch it.
Yeah.
So that's the regular, how things go, right? Besides, your patching Windows, your security maintenances, you don't touch that very often. So all the suggestion presented yesterday was around, let's try to shift that mindset a bit more from that famous analogy from pets versus cattle, which is pretty famous for DevOps, but it's extremely new when we go to SAP. So let's try to shift that focus a bit more. So there are companies that used to do their high availability testings every 6 months. we can, so that's a lot. And the majority of them...
If you're not watching on YouTube here, my eyes just got very big.
But that's the typical. So the majority of companies, at least that I interact with, big companies here in the States, they do like every 6 months. Some of them, they do 3 months. And I heard about one customer that wanted to do that every 2 weeks. So that was the most aggressive one I've ever heard. So yes, we can combine some of the DevOps practices, some of the DevOps non-technologies, so we can speed that up, we can do those testings more often, and we can be better prepared for, failures and things that typically happen. And we are just waiting for them, right? So instead of just waiting here, seated at my chair, let's do something more proactive to go in there, right?
Let's try to go ahead and solve the problem in advance. It makes total sense. Like you've talked about a couple of examples here of how you're leveraging DevOps practices to extend SAP's capabilities and enhance the approaches you can take around automated testing and other things. Are there different categories of DevOps practices that you're applying? Is it mostly around testing? What's your approach?
Yeah, so what I've seen and the opportunities, so I come from a very strong SAP, again, professional services inside AWS. So we interact with biggest companies here in the States, like huge shops of SAP. So we try to focus more on the opportunities and the struggles we see like on the market. And this is very nice because we interact and we learn a lot every single day whenever we talk to a new customer or an existing customer about the struggles that they are having. So what I guess that all of the automations and all of these improvements we've been working for the last 2 or 3 years, I guess they kind of categorized in something around the operations part. Because again, we cannot go inside SAP.
Right.
We do, but it's not very much nice. But then we go into the operations. So again, automating this Chaos Engineering part, automating the auto-scaling for SAP. So again, auto-scaling is something very usual, I can say, but that's pretty tricky when you go to SAP and you cannot do auto-scaling in the majority of the servers. So you do auto-scaling in just 1 or 2 of them. So even that, the automation is not like a streamline, it's not a simple flow like we have with other applications. So you have to have a strategy of how do you want to auto-scale and also the limit of your auto-scaling. So I can summarize that into the operations part.
I'd love to understand the strategy piece. What's maybe a typical or example strategy that you would take to implementing this? So
a typical SAP landscape, you have the database. So let's use HANA here as the example. Right. So the in-memory database from SAP. You have an ASCS and ERS, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what does that mean.
We're going to use a lot of acronyms. That's okay.
But basically, that's an NQ server. So that guy centralizes all the requests between the platform internally. So it's pretty important. And here we already start seeing some stuff. So different names that SAP gives to common things that the open source world knows. So the ASCS is always the primary one, and ASCS is always working. If that guy goes down, ERS takes up, which is basically the same software installed, but once ASCS is primary and ERS is secondary. That's the rule. So it's not the same application that you're deploying to different servers. So they are different applications, but they work in a high availability scenario. Now getting to your question, the third layer of this, so database, queue server, and then the third layer is actually where your users connect to. So that is the PAS, primary application server, something like that. That one I remembered.
Nice.
And when you want to auto-scale SAP, so you don't talk about database, you don't talk about the NQ server, you just talk about where your users connect. And if you have just one server right now and the database is working fine with that one server, that same database will have to handle well if you have 10 servers. So that's a struggle in planning from the very beginning. So that is the only guy, the PAS, that you can auto-scale in, 1, 2, 3, 6, 10, 20, 30 servers for the biggest shops out there. That then your users will connect there. And again, your database have to handle that. So you have to have a very powerful big instance because again, just one of them, even though you have 2 databases, let's say for high availability, 2 queue servers, only one of them is always the primary. And the other one is just idle, waiting for something to happen.
Interesting. So, this is intriguing. Obviously, there's a massive scale to this. As you mentioned, 77% of worldwide monetary transactions have at least one SAP connection in them. There's clearly some distinct challenges that you're facing in trying to extend the capabilities of DevOps to SAP because of, to your point, how conservative they are about moving forward. Are there other challenges you'd like to highlight that maybe we haven't dug into so far, areas you want to dive into more?
Well, I guess that one of the biggest challenges we see out there is still this huge complex installation and migration process. And that's understandable, right? Because this is usually the spine of every organization is an SAP server.
Right.
So if you are doing anything, I don't know, your orders system, your online cards, so all of that is working in a different layer. And after that, that's pushing data inside SAP. So SAP is usually the spine of every organization. So we are very much used to, I don't know, talk about integrations on SAP as well. One of the biggest challenges we still see, and honestly, I don't know very much about how SAP's vision for that for the future, how they are investing on that, is still so breaking these huge, I cannot say single, but few points of failure. So still, if you want an SAP, you have to go under a complex project, some months for sure, installing things. And so you cannot do SAP inside Kubernetes, as one example. So this common stack I told you, of course, there are examples. Hybris, which is SAP's e-commerce, runs on Kubernetes. That's nice. That's not as simple as, I don't know, installing SonarQube or Atlassian or these other guys. So those guys are pretty so simple. You just connect there and
plug and play to some extent.
Yeah, so they're very simple. So SAP doesn't work that way. So this is, I guess, the main challenge that still blocks a lot of things from, I don't know, for even modernizing even more. So you still don't talk about microservices on SAP, and it's a long journey to get to there. So for me, this is the biggest challenge, because since we have so few big points, so many few, that's nice to say, so many few big points of failure, breaking those should be simpler. I don't know, for further modernization.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting to talk about this in a chaos engineering context, because it really limits the potential of the testing you can do. What advice would you have for people who will either listen to your talk or listen to this podcast, but how to start approaching this and saying, okay, I want to apply chaos engineering techniques to my SAP instance. I want to start trying to extend this. How would you recommend they get started?
Yeah, so this is kind of the mindset that I've been applying since I started to interact with SAP again. So again, I mentioned that I did have some SAP experience, then I shifted into the open source, and now I am an SAP folk again. What I've been doing is every time that you talk to an SAP expert, you're going to say, hey, I want to do chaos engineering for SAP. He's going to laugh. He's going to say, yeah, are you nuts? What is chaos engineering? First of all, what is chaos engineering? The same subjects, they don't flow with the SAP world as well.
Do you want to do a brief definition for folks? We've had episodes on this before, but I want to make sure everyone here has a definition of chaos engineering, just to make sure they have something in their head.
So basically, chaos engineering is you injecting failures in your servers, in your applications, not just the servers, on purpose, in a controlled environment, in a controlled way, so that you can prepare for the worst scenario. Yeah. Some examples, you can inject failures inside your servers. Like I said, I don't know, let's break the application, let's kill some process, let's see what happens. You can inject failures on the network, so let's add some latency. And wow, latency in the SAP world is one of the hardest things to spot. Let's inject, I don't know, a system crash. Let's inject some DNS failure, some resolution failure, and let's see what happens. So chaos engineering goes all around that, injecting things, errors on purpose, and hey, let's see what happens. And once we see what happened, let's come up with a plan so that thing doesn't happen for real when a real scenario is here.
Totally. The thing I really love about chaos engineering is it's such an iterative way to drive continuous learning and to prepare your company, your team, your technology for a worst case scenario. And particularly when we're thinking about something like SAP that is so integral to the way the world works with payments, it seems like having that injection of failure so you can understand how to improve it and make it safer would be crucial. And so to your point, you've kind of alluded to this, like it's a little concerning that it's so hard to test failure, because that means in a worst case scenario, which they do happen, even to companies like SAP, there is so much potential for us not to be prepared.
So even on the newest releases of SAP, which is called BTP, I guess it's Business Technology Platform, which is like the very, very new. I don't know if it was released still in 2022 or 2021, I don't remember. But for SAP, that's extremely new. So a very few number of customers are already using that. So that guy is supposed to have microservices and a more modern approach. But again, it's extremely new for SAP users. And it's still blurry exactly what you can do. So I've been talking to some of my personal friends that work on SAP. They told me, okay, yeah, you can do this, you can do that. But still, I haven't seen that working in a real scenario to share more. And I know, oh yeah, so now that's possible, right?
Yeah.
So I've been hearing stuff.
So there's potential. That's great to hear. So I sidetracked you a little bit, but I was wondering about the strategy that you'd recommend to folks who are trying to extend the capabilities of SAP and start doing some of this chaos engineering testing.
Oh yeah, so that's basically what I've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years. If you go to an SAP folk and you say, hey, let's do chaos engineering SAP, he's gonna laugh. Yeah, right? If you want to talk to them and say, let's do unit testing, they say, why? So they don't get the importance of that. So basically what I've been doing, I've been trying to ask the right questions and trying to engage just on the right battles. Because everything that I've been hearing for this operation side, again, so not talking about DevOps inside SAP, about this operation side, chaos engineering, auto-scaling, as I said, so some more regular maintenance operations that we have. Whenever I ask a question and they say, yeah, that's not possible, I ask, why? So far, always the response is vague. So basically, it's because I don't know or I'm not sure. Yeah, in theory, that can work, but I don't know, SAP is not going to support that, things like that. So SAP not supporting stuff is also another big blocker for that. But again, so my suggestion is let's try to challenge those common knowns that are out there. So usually SAP folks have been working for organizations, I don't know, for 20 years, 30 years. So they are very, again, conservative on the practices that they apply. And sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So if they are not familiar with the chaos engineering concept, they are not sure. How can you tell me we cannot do chaos engineering for SAP, right? So my suggestion is let's challenge those things that we don't know. And because many of them so far, per my researchers, my work with customers, they are possible. We just are short of people implementing them.
And my understanding is you have 12 scenarios of failure that you've identified in particular.
Basically, so these are 12 scenarios where you inject failures on SAP. And the example of yesterday was this HANA database to, again, see what happens. So basically, there are some commands specifically to SAP, like HDB stop, pacemaker. So pacemaker is a library that you use to put the nodes in synchronization. So it's a clustering tool. So basically, you inject errors. Each one of these 12 items, it's one error that you inject on the server. So first one I said HDB stop. It's not actually an error, but it's an unexpected behavior for the cluster. So you have 2 servers running and you're going to go there into the primary and you're going to say, hey, stop. Let's see what happens. So the first thing that it's going to tell is if your high availability is set up properly for this scenario, okay? Because this is just one of the scenarios. So all of the 12 go around something like this. The one that I find more interesting is the one that I guess it's so closer to what we hear from Netflix practices. So what do they do for injecting failures on their application? So one of these 12 is basically you go there into the Linux server and you inject an error. You basically echo something into a very specific process that happens in Linux, and that's going to make the instance crash. So first the instance freezes, and again, so that's the scenario I like the most because the instance freezes. So the instance doesn't tell its peer, hey, I'm going to go down. The instance doesn't tell AWS, hey, I'm going to go down. So basically the instance freezes. After 2 or 3 minutes, AWS realizes that the instance froze. Then AWS stops the instance and then, yeah, there you go. So this is unexpected. So nobody ever told anyone that, hey, I'm going down, the first instance.
A decent bit of lag time built in there.
Yes, exactly. So let's monitor if the second one is going to pick up from there, like expected. And so this is my favorite scenario so far of these 12 you mentioned.
Fantastic. It's interesting you mentioned Netflix. Obviously, they do a fantastic job of approaching chaos engineering. I'll shout out that we had Nora Jones, formerly of Netflix's chaos engineering team, on the podcast earlier this year. Great episode. If you're looking for someone to follow up on this and learn more about chaos engineering, these two will fit really well together. I'd love to dive into how you got here, Guilherme. How did you decide that this is what you wanted to work on next? How did you end up at AWS doing this?
I like to say that no knowledge that we ever got throughout our entire life is useless, right? So when I started there with my 17, 18s, yeah, I was an ABAP developer. ABAP is the language that we use to develop inside SAP. It's proprietary for SAP. So I started like that, worked like 3 years doing that. After that, my career just shifted focus into more the open source area, which when I started learning programming, coding, I was in love with Java. So I always loved the open source part. So I saw some opportunities back at the company that I was. I was an app developer, but I was seeing like this big team working in Java, and they were doing great stuff, amazing stuff. So things that were new, 10 years ago that we are talking about nowadays, like, service mesh, like load balancing, where the load balancers were extremely expensive, right? There was no cloud still. Let's put it in quotes, right? Yeah. But the adoption was not as it is today. So I was seeing those guys doing this amazing stuff. I was excited about that. Hey, I want to be there. So that's when I shifted my career into 100% the open source part. And when I saw this opportunity at AWS, I always loved the company, because when we started working with the cloud, AWS is the main player so far.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I want to work on AWS one of these days.
Here you are.
Yeah. So when I saw the listing for some DevOps inside SAP, DevOps SAP engineer or DevOps SRE engineer, maybe that's something that would be interesting. So I applied myself. I discussed with my previous manager, and he said, yeah, that's basically what you're looking for. The questions I made, right?
Yeah.
So we were basically looking for more automations and doing things for our customers faster. That's when I landed into AWS, and it's been great.
Fantastic. Are there other things happening at AWS that you want to mention as far as, exciting work being done, things that you see coming down the horizon?
Yeah, so my team works directly. So I'm not from a services team. So everything I do, you won't find in the console, like looking for, RDS or EC2. I don't do that. So basically, I support customers that are doing, they are migrating or they are evolving. They are doing something inside AWS. Let's say you are a customer, you are looking to, again, migrate or evolve or do something inside AWS, and you want an expert to know how to best run your SAP inside AWS. That's when my team comes in.
Perfect.
So the things that we do there the most, so again, we try to modernize and to accelerate the journey of customers to go into AWS. Because again, these projects for migrating stuff, they take years.
Yes.
So they are very expensive. And this is what we've been focusing a lot. So nowadays we have tremendous levels of automations, and we can have just new joiners, guys that have just joined the organization. We have this huge set of automations, Terraform, CloudFormation, Ansible, Bash, whatever, to help them to be faster and to provision things faster and to help the customers faster. So this is something that we are always looking for, because this is what customers, are most talking about, right? So AWS is this very customer-obsessed company, as everybody says.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so we like to keep hearing what our customers tell us and then invest on that. So again, shortening the time to deploy stuff or to modernize. Right now, so just from some experience, I'm working on this project where we are migrating some applications into Kubernetes. So a few of them that SAP allows. That's pretty nice.
Interesting. I'm also curious, given that we're here at DevOps Enterprise Summit, what are the things that are happening in DevOps and around the industry that you think are going to be kind of the next applications of techniques or strategy that you see coming?
For me, and I heard that yesterday in many different ways from many different speakers here at the conference, and this is something that for me it's great to hear, because it's something that I believe a lot. So something that we were not used to hear 10 years ago was this psychology part getting more into organizations. So whenever we talk that developers have to be happier to be more productive, whenever we talk that managers, they have to be happier, or happier is not the word, but more comfortable, more empowered, more safe.
There's research that shows that when teams feel empowered and that their work is impactful, they are happier and they perform better. And we're seeing more and more signs of that, to your point, with happiness being such a predictor of retention and success on productivity.
And so this is something that I believe, and I keep following. So looking for the stuff that I'm reading and I'm learning, I'm studying about. So this entire, let me use the psychology word here for the organizations. So we are taking better care of people. We are taking better care of managers, of individual contributors. So the entire organizations are talking about that right now. And this is a great beginning. I'm not saying that we are just in the beginning, but this is something already. If we take a look like 10 years ago, it was just like, you do as I say. So we are shifting this mindset. And when this happens, and it's just not IT, right? It's for the entire, I don't know, any other industry. When folks are more comfortable and when they, I don't know, they trust their employer, they do their jobs better. They're delivering better
Higher
software.
quality products, absolutely.
Higher quality. And more than that, what catches me the most is that we are investing in that folks, on those folks' lives. Because if you're happy, I don't know about you, I spend, 8-10 hours a day in my work every day. So if I'm awake like 16 hours a day, I am almost
half of my time, if not more. Yeah,
I am almost 2/3 of my living time working, except Saturdays and Sundays, of course. So that affects directly your personal life. So if you're happy at work, you will be very much likely to be happier, with your spouse, with your children, with your family. And then you start like thinking broadly. You won't care just about yourself. You care about, the environment. You help your community. You help your neighborhood.
That's a great perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's too many folks, particularly years ago, who kind of took this perspective of like, we're going to like use folks up in a way. We're going to use their efforts. We're going to push through it. And I think what we discovered is like creating a more sustainable social circuitry that really programs teams to be more successful and happier is more sustainable for the team. It's better, to your point, for the individual and I'm sure their community. And it's also better for the company because it lets them be more customer obsessed. Exactly. It lets them dive into their work more and be passionate. They're going to spend that extra care to like understand and dive into it. And so I think it's a really wonderful thing we're seeing. And on that note, I'd love to ask you, you're very clearly passionate about Chaos Engineering, about the work you're doing at AWS. Are there any closing thoughts you want to share with us?
So loving the conference. So this is a very nice, set number of talks here, speeches we've been hearing. And again, I love to hear that we are investing more and more with this culture thing.
Definitely.
So just about the book they released yesterday, I was watching the presentation where they mentioned briefly what the book's gonna...
And just to clarify, this is Wiring the Winning Organization by Dr. Steve Spear and Gene Kim. We interviewed Dr. Spear on the podcast. I'm not sure if it's gonna be out already by the time we release this, but definitely check it out if it is. It's great talk.
Awesome. Yeah, so basically that book, from what I understood of their speech introducing the book, they are basically approaching same culture, same concepts that we are used to know, but in a different way. And I love that.
Program high performance teams, because there are consistent high performance across different companies, right? Like companies with the same resources, the same initial approach, build better teams and are more successful. Like the example Dr. Spear used on the podcast was Toyota, which is like vastly outperformed in what employees are capable of because they've intentionally built these happy, high-performing teams that are, cut down on friction points and are set up for success. So that's a great highlight. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Guilherme, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a fantastic pleasure chatting with you, getting to know you a little bit. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation as well. It's been great. Thank you for the partnership here on the conference.
Our pleasure.
That's awesome.
If you want to hear more thoughts from incredible leaders like Guilherme, check out our Substack, devinterrupted.substack.com. We put out articles every Thursday, deep dives into concepts like Chaos Engineering on SAP. And also our Tuesday editions include articles from our community, our partners, and of course, our podcasts. Hope to talk to you all soon, and thanks for listening.